Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. I am UrzaMaster. Joining me as always, Lord Uther and Jedi Master Psyllium Maas. Gentlemen, welcome back to the Council Chambers as we venture once more to the galaxy far, far away in a time long, long ago even compared with the original Star Wars trilogy. We're talking about, of course, the Acolyte, and this episode, Choice, which reveals something? Jedi Master Psyllium Maas, let's hear a little bit more about the background and goings-on in this particular episode.
Thank you, Jedi Master UrzaMaster. Thank you, Jedi Master Lord Uther. Thanks to everyone on the Jedi Council and watching at home. Welcome to the penultimate episode of The Acolyte, Episode 7, Choice. We have the same director for this episode as we did for Episode 3, Destiny. Kogonada helmed both, so it was kind of a clue early on that we might be revisiting the tragedy of Brendok right before we built up to the big season finale. We also had 3 writers for this episode, 2 of whom had already worked on the show and 1 was a newcomer. Charmaine de Great worked on the show, Jen Richards, newcomer, and Jasmine Flournoy, who actually co-wrote Episode 3, Destiny, which this episode samples heavily from. And this really is a remix, remastering, retelling, a la Kurosawa's Rashomon, of events that we had already witnessed in Episode 3, but from a different point of view. And we learn why the Jedi have come to Brendok and how it went so wrong. And friends, that's really where the strength of this episode and perhaps these revelations lay. Because instead of, being consumed by left field surprises or I didn't see that coming, Colin Farrell is an alien type of plot twists, what we have in this episode is the slow inevitability of tragedy. I happen to be reading a book off camera about the Challenger disaster with Krista McAuliffe as the first teacher in space. And it talks about how she won the contest, how she was picked by NASA and did the training, and her fellow crewmates, and how everything was supposed to go fine in that early frigid January morning until it didn't. And what haunts me as I read these pages and as I watch Episode 7 of The Acolyte is that it all seems foretold that bad things are going to happen. And there's no way to change the narrative, and there's no way to avoid the skid, and there's no way to prevent the crash. These things just had written themselves based out of character. Who these people are revealed to be and what motivates and drives them. So we see that Torben is impetuous as a Padawan, and he just wants to go back home to Coruscant. He's tired of being out on the frontier. He's chafing under the long study of fauna and flora on distant Jedi expeditions. And he just wants to be back and have that safe home environment. So naturally, when circumstances open a door for that, he seizes upon it and risks throwing an entire mission into peril. We have Saul, a Jedi Master we have praised on this council, week in and week out, revealed to be somewhat more human, in fact, possibly even a little selfish. We see that he is the object of some light derision from his fellow Jedi peers, is that he's never had a Padawan. Whether that's simply because, the council wouldn't permit it, or he just didn't have the right temperament to be able to be a true teacher, which then evolved in the 16 years prior to the events we see in this episode to the present day. It's unclear, but it's obviously something that fuels his connection with Osha. And he kind of makes that connection in a vacuum. There's no one-on-one interaction until they all show up at the ascension ceremony. And then later when he tests her, he just decides sort of, she should be my Padawan. I feel this connection to this girl. You know, Qui-Gon felt something similar with Anakin as a slave on Tatooine. But it's unclear whether those feelings, are genuine, are the Jedi way, and that it might blind him to what his code is and the path he is expected to follow. And so it is Saul who slays Mother Anastasia. Now she was casting into her dark magics, the dark side of the Force. We weren't quite sure what was going to be the result of that as she started to turn into smoke. It could have been just an attempt to flee. But in any event, Saul stabbed first and didn't bother with questions. And so he was responsible for her demise. And then given the choice with trying to save the twins, Osha and May, Saul makes that choice and he sacrifices May. It's a deliberate, it was too strong for me. I couldn't control I couldn't hold her. He decides, I'm going to let this one go, presumably to fall to her death, and I'm going to save the one that I've sort of targeted all along. Now, what's interesting is that even with all of these new revelations about what happened, we still don't have a clear picture of how May was able to survive what happened after she dropped into the abyss. So there's still potentially even more revelations coming in terms of what her point of view was. So we have Saul, and I don't think of him as a villain, and we'll see what the other council members think. I mean, far from it. I see him as human. I see him as somebody who, made the choice with the information, the best information on hand and what was in his heart. But that doesn't necessarily paint a flattering portrait of a wise Jedi Master. And I think that's the point of the show, is that it's easy to put the light and the dark. We talked about this in our previous installment. We talked about it being very binary. The good guys, they follow the light, and the bad guys follow the dark, and those are easy stakes to absorb and understand. But again, we live in a reality-based universe, and very rarely will you see something fall so cleanly and so neatly on one side of the line or the other. So in essence, I think it makes Saul a terrific character in that he has these insecurities, perhaps, of not having a Padawan, or he has little bits of selfishness where I'm going to do this no matter what the council or Indara tell me. And these choices lead to consequences, both in the immediate and 16 years down the road. And as far as Andara goes, I mean, we glimpsed her in a terrific opening sequence where she fought May and was struck down. And here we finally get a fuller picture. She is someone who follows the rules. She is someone who waits for the council to give orders. She doesn't go rogue. She doesn't act recklessly. And when Kelnaka is possessed by the dark force magics, and by the way, who had the ability to see a Wookiee Jedi just go all out, I thought we were robbed of that with his murder on Kofar. But we got to finally see what a Jedi with a lightsaber from the planet Kashyyyk looks like, and boy, I want to hear the council's reaction to that. In her attempt to save her friend, and she did so with the honorable intention of trying to break this hold that the thread had taken over in his head, she inadvertently unleashed a psychic force wave, presumably. Whatever she did to break the link was enough to basically wipe out the Coven. I mean, it's the equivalent of, a mass casualty event that she did. Now, did she do it for the best of reasons as far as where I'm just trying to save my friend? Yes. Did she intend to murder or lead to the murder of dozens of these Force witches in this coven? Absolutely not, I don't believe. But again, there's a little bit of shadow on ultimately what happens there. And I think the most telling part of this episode is at the end, when given the chance to face the council and explain their actions, Torben's, Saul's, Indara's, they basically all agreed to go with the cover-up. May started a fire, it got out of control, the witches were consumed, we managed to save the good one, and she can be Saul's Padawan. And that's the story they're going with, and that's what leads to all of this 16 years later. And that's why I say we still don't have all the connective tissue. We don't know how Qimir factors into this. We know what drives him. We know what motivates him as a would-be Sith who wants to be able to practice his religion, as he would put it, without the Jedi telling him how he can and cannot behave. And he wants to share that knowledge with, an acolyte, a disciple. And that was originally May, and now has turned his dark energies on Osha. But we don't know how he fits into, how did he come across May? Was he the one that saved her? What was his role, if any, on Brendok? Why might Sol think he was familiar? So there are still tantalizing, teasing clues. And I don't know the future of the show. I think there's this rush every time something premieres now in the streaming universe, whether it's Fallout on Prime Video or Ripley on Netflix, or pick your favorite show of the past year, Sugar on Apple TV, Slow Horses. There's always this drive like, I want more seasons. Give me 3, 4, 7, 11. And sometimes some stories just aren't designed for that long haul. Sometimes they're just supposed to be micro bites, which I think is what the ObiWan Kenobi show for Disney Plus did so successfully. They told a specific story in a specific timeline with these specific characters, and anything other than that would just be, milking the bantha. I don't think there are plans to continue that particular series, although Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi is often welcome and would never be turned away. The Acolyte, to me, I think Leslie Headland, showrunner and creator, I think she wants to do more. And I think the way that this first season here has been designed, it's not designed to wrap up and answer all of these questions we have. So I hope that next week we get to a point where we could be satisfied with where the show is and maybe want more. And if they decide, yes, we'll go ahead and do further installments, then those questions may indeed be addressed head on. But, think of how the Book of Boba Fett ended versus Ahsoka. Book of Boba Fett, they defeat the Rancor and they defeat the Pike Syndicate, and everyone is like, well, we're going to rebuild Mos Espa and more future adventures to be had. And if they drop in and we see Fennec Shand and Boba running Mos Espa, terrific. And if we don't, well, we had our story. Contrast that with Ahsoka, where Sabine and Ahsoka and everyone are trapped on one end of the galaxy, and Thrawn and the Night Sisters and Ezra are on the other end of the galaxy, and Thrawn's going to repurpose the Empire and transition them into the First Order. And there's a lot still to ask and answer in that show, and we are getting future installments. What was Baylan Skoll looking for, and did he ultimately find it, and how did that change him? So some shows have a journey and a lifespan all of their own. I'm very much looking forward to seeing the season finale, because I'd like to see how final a finale is, because we still have all these questions. And there are more worlds in this High Republic era that can be explored, as the books and the comic books tied into this have shown. So that's very much where I am with this. I thought this episode, while we had sort of danced around and perhaps surmised some things that had happened here, it didn't play out exactly as I expected. I'll be the first to admit I was completely wrong about a direct Qimir link so far to the witches and the planet and so forth. But, you know, like I say, maybe we find that out this week or next week, what it all means. But I just thought as I watched it, I just thought it does something that I want Star Wars and Star Trek and good drama, good television, good movies to do. I mean, it made me feel. I felt something, you know, reflecting on the Jedi as, you know, not 100% pure, or the Sith as 100% committed to ruling the galaxy. Again, Qimir, at least as far as he's expressed it to us, he's not out there to, you know, bend the Republic to his knee and he will conquer it all. He just wants to be his best version of himself. And in this era, the Jedi, there's no discussion, dissent, or tolerance for that kind of thing. So while he does have bad intentions and while he has murdered, and we've seen it and so forth, again, his motives are very personal. And I think that's something that this show has done successfully, is that it has lowered the stakes, not to a sense where they don't matter, but they're very much intertwined with the characters and their own personal backstories. So this is very much a show that's based, you know, in relationships rather than large galactic, you know, myths and foundations and so forth. This is really much about, it's grounded, if you will, under the guise of like a crime story. So, gentlemen, you've been very patient and very thoughtful in your analysis so far. What did the tragedy of Brendok share with you, and what do you see happening in the finale?
Well, we knew this was coming, right? We talked about this a couple episodes ago about how we were going to see essentially another point of view, and it probably wouldn't answer everything. We'll probably get the couple bits and pieces that we need, like May's ultimate survival story. And I have to say I was a little disappointed because it really didn't tell me much that was new or groundbreaking. It wasn't as exciting for me. Sol, I think they built up as this great Jedi Master, and now they've kind of defeated him in a way. He seems sort of like wanton, and I don't know. I feel like you get some development from the other three Jedi that, you know, they've isolated themselves. They clearly have regret. They have, you know, these a little more on the nose feelings that you'd expect from a Jedi. Yet Sol is a prominent member of the Council, or at least of the higher order. He's got a new Padawan at the beginning of the series. He's clearly still got this connection to Osha that it feels very un-Jedi. And I know the whole idea here is that it's something to upset the balance. But it's hard to believe that there actually is a balance after this episode. It's like I don't know that this is the catalyst that they're setting it up to be. It seems more like the Jedi already had some problems. This just happens to be one along the way. So I wonder, you know, is it Qimir that's the first to upset the balance? The first failed Padawan, and how does he quite fit here? I like that I'm still asking that question, but to be one episode left in the series and or the season, it means that the last episode has to be a real banger, which is great. I want it to be, but I feel like there's a lot more potential here. Now, the fight with
Kelnaka,
you know, the Wookiee Jedi was great. I mean, that was truly something spectacular to see. And the fact that, you know, 3 Jedi barely took him down was very impressive. I loved the whole Force Switch interaction. The one thing is, I like that Soul, and this might have been the moment that saved Soul's character for me. I don't think he went there with any intention to follow through with his hope to separate Osha from her family. I think he truly did go there to stop the other guy, but in the same midst of it, there was that curiosity of how did these kids get to be like? They have to study the virgins. They have to understand what that is to get off of this world and to leave them in peace. And I think Soul recognized that if they could do that, he could prevent a conflict. So I guess through that lens, I wasn't terribly upset. I think the execution was a little off. We still don't have an answer to that question, which maybe that gets revealed in the last episode, maybe not. It wasn't a bad episode. It was just one of those TV episodes where I'm kind of like, didn't quite hit my expectations. Although I will say my expectations were relatively high too. I mean, the show really sets the bar, especially after the conflict with Qimir and the reveal and all of the Jedi getting slaughtered in the forest. Like, that's a high bar of action to set to follow it up with exposition. So I really hope this last episode is not just a sliding denouement into a next season, because that would leave me very deflated. We need something to wrap up. There has to be a conclusion of some kind. What that looks like, I don't know. And that is a double-edged sword. Because normally I like to be surprised. I like to be in that mode where I really don't know what comes next. I'm a little fearful in this case because I feel like this one could easily steer itself right off the rails. And I'm utterly disappointed with season 1. Or it gives away too much, and it's like, well, now how are they going to do a season 2? That's why I hesitate to embrace these one-season shot shows, these little mini-series shows, because if they build you up for future shows, or if they build you up for potential seasons, and then that doesn't happen, I think about the spin-off of The Mandalorian, the Shield of the New Republic or whatever. Yep. That would have been a fantastic show. However, it never happened, and now it's not going to happen. That really bites because they really set it up nicely. It's kind of like when they backdoor pilot a show you're really excited for, only to find out, oops, I guess we're not getting Wayward Sisters. It's tough. But I mean, I think, again, we're clamoring for those new Star Wars stories. This is a novel approach to a Star Wars story, so I'm not disappointed in that regard. I'm hoping the payoff. I'm hoping it does it right.
See, a couple things. I think you're both struggling with this. Even you, Psyllium Maas. I know you're saying you're liking it, but I was hearing a little bit of struggle when you were explaining it. And Urza, I think you're bringing up some great points too. Psyllium Maas, you said there's more worlds to be explored. And I agree 100%. And I think that's one thing we've been pushing for a while. And I think that's the one thing, too, that I've brought up a few times that UrzaMaster has said, which is there's other stories to be told. And I feel like we're rehashing a story from episode 1. I just feel like it's the same story again. I mean, right. We've got the M count being brought up again. The Jedi really are bad. Even Mother, I'm going to say her name wrong. Mother Anastasia says, this will be your downfall, like you're blind to this. I heard that in Phantom Menace already. Like, I don't need to hear those things again. And so you're rehashing the story that I thought really wasn't supposed to happen until Anakin, but I'm seeing it now for some reason. I don't understand why I'm seeing it now. And then they bring up the Virgins, and they really don't explain it. Now, maybe they're going to do that in the final episode, because I feel like they didn't explain it that much. I feel like we had to kind of figure out what the Virgins is, and it almost seems to me like it's my interpretation was the light and the dark coming together, making graying Jedi. You're welcome. But maybe that's what they're going for. But if that's what you're going for, you don't need to use this as the vehicle to take us there. We could have seen it in a different manner without rehashing. I mean, I really feel like half of this story, I've heard it before, and I don't need to hear it again. And to me, the only thing that saved this episode was the Wookiee fight, was Kanaka. I mean, that was great. Even Torben, when he was wielding the lightsaber, like, oh, I'm getting some good Jedi stuff, but Indara could have saved him earlier in the episode the same way she saved Kalnaka. Like that whole part of the episode too could have been done away with because she showed that she could break that link. So again, I feel like I'm seeing a rehashing of a story. I feel like they're not explaining parts of it. Then it seems like the way she solved that one issue could have been solved. She had the same issue earlier, could have been solved with her just kind of stopping that. Torben's this whiny Padawan. I've seen that. To me, that's what. And everyone was, and I've talked about this before. Everyone was ripping on Hayden Christensen for his performance in 2 and 3, and I thought they were spot on because that's what was taking him down that path of the dark side. And then UrzaMaster, I think you said it perfectly about Saul. They totally cut him out at the legs. I mean, they completely took him out. That is not the Jedi that I feel like we had seen for a couple episodes before. I felt like we were seeing a curious Jedi that was trying to figure out what was going on, and instead they totally pulled the rug out from under him in a sense. And then they're going to go lie to the council. Why? Again, I don't need to see this. Making the Jedi the bad or questionable guys, again, we've kind of seen that. So the vehicle of using Osha and May, I don't think they needed that. I think they could have told a different story. I think they could have told a story about Virgins and the Force a different way without going this route. So I'm struggling with it too because I had a lot of hope. Urza, again, your point about the last episode being so great, it's almost, again, it's kind of like Saul. It's like they pulled the rug out right up from under themselves with this episode. I'm disappointed. And now and I'm sitting there too going, wait, you're going to end this next, how are you going to end this in one episode? Because I still felt like, I think Qimir, I can't say his name wrong all the time too. Yeah. I think he's there somewhere on that planet while all this is going down, right? I do like the choice that Saul had to make. I think that was excellent, right? It almost reminds me of, who would you save if you could, your wife or your kids? And it's like, don't ever ask me that question. I'll say, no, you got to save one or the other. You can't save them both. That's like a nightmare for a father and a husband, right? And so you see Saul going through that same nightmare. And he's got to pick one of them. And that's heartbreaking. I can live with that, with a Jedi trying to have to figure that out. I don't need to see the Jedi being bad guys. We're going to see that later on. I know I've already said that. I just have to bring that up one more time. I thought I had read they're going to have a second season, but I just tried to look it up again, and they're saying they're not sure if there's going to be a second season. How are you going to end this? And it worries me even more because, it kind of feels like every time they come out with a new Star Wars series, the fate of new series relies on whatever happens with the series that's out there. So what does this do? I would love to see High Republic stuff because I don't know enough about it. I don't feel like I'm gaining any insight right now into what the High Republic is all about because I know I keep saying it, but I'm seeing a rehashed story. And I just feel like there's a different way to do it. And so I don't know where we're going here. I'm very, very worried.
No, you've brought up some excellent points.
Of course I have.
The main arc of the High Republic, and you're right. This is divorced somewhat from what the story they're trying to tell in that era. It's that the universe is still waiting to be explored. The Jedi and Coruscant and the Republic are generally at peace, but there is and some might say this cribs from the extended universe, what were they called, the Yuzon Vorg or whatever those beings were.
Wish they would do that story, yes. But anyway.
There is this race of just fearsome galactic space pirates, marauders, looters, real scum of the earth. And they're called the Nile, Nihil. And they just make life miserable for the Republic and the Jedi, and they attack the equivalent of the World's Fair, and they create a great hyperspace disaster, which I believe is actually referenced in this episode. So the main arc is the Jedi versus the Nile is that main storyline. We're not getting any of that in here. This is, right at the end of this era. You've both talked about the Osha May, why did we have to do this vehicle there? And I agree that we still need to see ultimately how that plays out. But I don't want to take them out of this story, and if I could write the Acolyte, I wouldn't have the twins at all. I think that's seeing the forest or seeing the trees on Endor and not the forest. This is, however they were artificially created through the use of the Force near this Virgins. It's suggested in this episode it's one consciousness split into two bodies, and that's a fascinating idea. How did that work? What does that mean? One soul, two bodies. Can they be reunited? Can they be joined again? Is that a dyad? Is that what we got in the sequels with Ren and with Ben Solo and Rey? I mean, so there's that element that I'm curious to know more about. And this idea of the virgins, yes, you're right. They don't explicitly say it. I had to look it up. But according to the lore on the record right now, those ancient Jedi texts that Yoda says we don't need to read, a virgins is just a high concentration, like a high M count. It's a high concentration of Force energy, good, bad, and it can be located around a person, as Qui-Gon believed Anakin was a virgins in the Force. It can be located around a location, like the tree on Dagobah that Yoda warns Luke, you can only take in there what you bring yourself. Or even the cave on Ahch-To that Rey explores in The Last Jedi. So it's somewhat ill-defined even by Star Wars measures. They've never explicitly said exactly what a virgins is, but they believe that there's a high concentration of Force energy located around this planet, Brendok. Now, it could be directly tied to the twins as a result of their unusual conception, and again the splitting of consciousness from one to there. I know Leslie Headland has mentioned Darth Plagueis. To stay spoiler free, I have not read those interviews specifically, but she has entertained what could come and how this could all play in with the things that you and Jedi Master UrzaMaster have mentioned, a link to Palpatine and Plagueis and all of that. There are bridges that can still be built. And I think that leads me to Uther's point about how everything kind of hinges. Don't forget, this show is, while part of the Star Wars firmament, this is not currently under the Dave Filoni, Chief Executive Creative Officer of Lucasfilm, and Jon Favreau. Like the path that they have charted for us with Boba Fett and Mandalorian and Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew coming out this winter. That's one direction, of course. Leslie Headland was given autonomy to a degree, much like Tony Gilroy was given autonomy for Andor. This show is not necessarily, there are connections, but it is not so intertwined with what we're going to see with the Mandalorian and Grogu movie or the next Rey film on the big screen. I mean, it does sort of have its own siloed ability to tell the story. And she was given that freedom due to the success that she had with her other television series on Netflix and so forth. It's funny because some metrics have this show doing well. Other metrics, depending on the sources, say not so well. It's all depends on your point of view. The least watched Star Wars streaming series, like in terms of just how many eyeballs were on it, is, curiously enough, the most praised and well reviewed of all of them, and that's Andor. Like, fewest people watched it, and yet we've covered it here on the Graying Jedi. Go back and listen to our bit by bit details of Andor, and it's a fantastic show, and it's getting a second season. But they set out all along, that was the game plan. We're going to give you 2 seasons to tell this story of Cassian Andor and his transformation from scoundrel to rebellion hero, and what would drive him to join that fight. And there was an end game all along. I think what you're saying, Lord Uther, is absolutely spot on. Is that we invest our energy, our time, our emotions into characters or things, and we do want to see growth, and we do want to see where it all leads to us, and we don't want it to be, chopped off at the knees, rugs pulled out,
right,
cul-de-sac. But go on.
Right, with Andor, we know what's going to happen with Andor.
Right.
And we're still, it's stuff we haven't seen before, even though we know what's going to happen. And you've got, Psyllium Maas, Jedi Master Psyllium Maas, High Council member Psyllium Maas. You have to admit, we are seeing pieces of Episode 1 in this series that we don't need, right? Like
I don't know about
the M count thing. I'm seeing another virgin birth here. I already saw that.
Right.
That was supposed to make Anakin unique. To me, that's one of the things that makes him the way he is.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
I'm
not denying that you're correct, that there are echoes, rhymes, things of this that we've seen before. But if that was something that I held against, the shows, and for my love of Star Wars and its saga, then the sequel trilogy, I'd probably share a similar view to you in terms of how The Force Awakens takes many elements from A New Hope and just repackages and repurposes them. That's a whole different conversation. I don't know what hesitation you were sensing. I didn't mean to put that out in the universe. I am thoroughly enjoying this show, as I have enjoyed all of the content.
Oh.
We're old enough, even the youngest among us, Jedi Master, UrzaMaster, we are old enough to remember when constant Star Wars content was not always the case, and years would pass, and sometimes decades would pass before we were ever given more glimpses, which is why we read a lot of comic books and novels to address that fix. So anytime they can come up with something that's fresh and fun, and I get a Wookiee with a lightsaber and he darn near takes off Torben's head, I'm there for it.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
We sing the praises of the EU, and of course, UrzaMaster, you should jump in on this stuff too, right? We praise what we, and I will admit, I do not know the EU as well as you guys do. I don't. I know bits and pieces of it, right? But from what I know, like, that's compelling, interesting stuff. Go join me on this ride or this journey just real quick and help me figure this out. So we've got all this content. Disney buys Star Wars, says, oh, hey, this never happened because we want to make our own way. And they're still grabbing stuff from the EU, some of it, right? And they manipulate it a little bit, or we can see through, even I can see through some of it, that they were taking EU stuff and trying to put it in. Are they not embracing the EU because they don't want to pay these people that wrote these stories, because they're going to have a whole bunch of rights that are going to come to them, because having a Jason Solo fight Luke Skywalker is something we would have loved to have seen, or seeing the Yuuzhan Vong actually try to push in on this new republic, or this new, that should have sprung up after the Empire. that they were gonna have to pay, Timothy Zahn, or not Timothy Zahn for that. They were gonna have to pay these people for is R.A. Salvatore, he wrote that one. Is that why they're not embracing the EU to the way they should or they could? How about this High Republic stuff? You know more about it than I do. You're telling me about a story about the Nile, which sounds fantastic. I would love to see that. Why am I not seeing that? Because they don't want to pay these people, and I'm getting Rehashed Stories. And I'm not really not. And here I am, last week being like, I missed, I'm just so happy there's Star Wars right now. So for all of our Graying Jedi fans, I'm very happy there's Star Wars. Period. I still think it could be done a little differently. Anyway, help me out.
I tend to agree. I think they're adapting EU stories to fit the narrative they're trying to save, which is the sequel movies. That's the biggest flaw, I think. But at the same time, it does make them somewhat more compelling, because these were not flops. These were still big box office sellers. They did fine. They were mostly palatable movies. The Rian Johnson one wasn't great, but it was okay. They did some good things. There were some good characters. Certainly Finn and Moon Knight
Poe
was
Dameron.
also great. Poe Dameron, thank you. But they were also rehashed characters too. Poe Dameron was just Han Solo in different clothing. I forget his name now.
Finn,
thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Finn is just a rehash of Han Solo as well, mixed with a little bit of Luke Skywalker. They made him kind of skittish, kind of weird, kind of childish, and then they kind of gave him an entry into potential Force userdom, and then gave us Rey. And then shoved Rey down our throat, which, not unwelcome, but I gotta admit, Rey was not the strongest, most compelling character. She didn't even really convince me as like a Luke Skywalker suddenly is a Jedi Master in, episode 6. It always felt a little too convenient even then. Rey in the last, Jedi and the Rise of Skywalker was very hesitant. Because, Last Jedi is just the battle on Hoth. That's all it is. Just drawn out. So, yeah, the one thing that saves all of this is Baylan Skoll saying he wants to break this cycle. So they're just setting up the cycle right now. And of course, we're getting rehashed stories. It's a cycle. All of this stuff has happened before in some capacity. I think what could redeem this one, because you're right, I think, Lord Uther, this is Anakin's story, is the same as Osha and May's stories. It's just two halves of a whole, that Anakin is the whole that the two halves could never be. This feels like a Sith plot. This feels like Darth Plagueis making experiments with Force users who largely are ignored by the Jedi and left to their own devices, because what harm are they really doing? And or the Jedi don't want to be seen as conquerors. It fits. And if that's what we find out in the last episode, is that Qimir is actually the Padawan himself of Darth Plagueis, and now he wants his own Padawan because he wants to increase his own personal power, totally tracks with Sith. Count Dooku would have done the same thing. Well, as a matter of fact, he did with General Grievous. So all of these things are absolutely old stories being rehashed. However, even if this is the route they go, and they introduce Plagueis in the last episode, and this all plays out, if Ahsoka Season 2 reveals that Baylan Skoll discovers that this is all a big cycle that's originated from some original Sith versus Jedi plot forever ago, that will validate what they're doing here. Because that is the compelling story that could make for an amazing movie. If you brought the whole gang together to fight Thrawn and or influence the way that the First Order falls. And turns out, Balin and his Padawan learner, Blondie McHottie, whatever her name was, if somehow those folks come together post Rey movies in the new Rey series, and that becomes the galaxy conflict of breaking that cycle and not repeating the same thing, and like the first chip in the stone was killing off the last of the Skywalkers and leaving the last of the Palpatines, and now they have to overcome the light and dark tension. You sold me. It's a very long way to go to sell this huge story shift. But if you're Disney and you want to milk every penny out of Star Wars, this is what you do. And I'm going to eat it up because I'm a sucker and I have a podcast.
Right on.
But again, but because to your point, which I absolutely, it's one of the points that you brought up forever, and I love it so much. And like you keep saying, you can just do stuff we haven't seen before, which was kind of my hope for this, because I was hoping the High Republic. I was hoping what we were going to see wasn't going to be that, right? But to your point, Urza, if that's what they're going to show, that this is a cycle, and I think that's how you save it, right? I think in this last episode, you've got to have Plagueis in it. You've got to reveal that this is a plot, or this is something that went wrong, and that's what's going to become Anakin, right? So if this is his first attempt at trying to make this happen, which is kind of interesting, because if you look at the EU, Palpatine had all these clones that weren't working properly, and they failed constantly, and he was trying to get that right, blah, blah, blah. So if that's what we're seeing here is, hey, this was my first try at it, and it's got screwed up.
And then Anakin's
the result.
Is there you go.
Then you might have saved it. And do you need another season? I mean, I don't feel like another season's warranted, quite frankly, but who am I? But a wealthy podcaster. So, anyway.
Like and subscribe, share. Make sure you watch the ads for the entire 30 seconds. So someday we can get that 14 cents.
Please. All right, let's rate this. I'm under a tornado watch, so let's do this.
As we normally do. And under the guise of a tornado watch, a.k.a. Lord Uther needs his nap time. Just kidding. Let's give it our kyber crystal ratings. Jedi Master Psyllium Maas, let's launch it off with you. So far, every kyber crystal has been green, if I'm not mistaken. Does this change this week?
Absolutely not. I'm wearing a sweaty shirt with sleeves to show that's where my heart is all along, gentlemen. The only way you'll get me to say something bad about Star Wars is when they stop making them. So I am all in, and I'm looking forward to a fantastic finale.
I'm going to go zombie Wolverine yellow.
Nice.
Because episode 7 better have a cure to bring this back to life.
Interesting.
So I've said I was going to give it a chance, and I have been.
Yeah.
And I'm still going to get... That's why we didn't go red. But Disney, make it so.
I hope that's not the only zombie
UrzaMaster
Marvel character you currently own. That's a good set there.
True.
Nice. I will give this an up blue.
Up. Yeah. Squirrel.
I liked it. Yes, it was a good episode. It was a vehicle, again. I feel like this was moving pieces where they needed to be to give us something big in the finale. As we saw with Andor's season finale, I think we're going to get the same kind of thing here. We're going to get a big setup to something. I do think you could do a season 2. I don't think you could do a season 3. I think you could pull off a season 2 where you get a little more of the Sith storyline, a little more Plagueis. I think that's what they're going to do. And I think that gives you a little bit of time gap, or a bridge to get over the gap of time to the Rey series, where this is all going to come to a head. And you're going to see this Mandalorian, Grogu, Grey Jedi, Rey crossover that's going to bring everything together in a new light. I do think this might be how they redeem some of the flaws of the sequel movies and Episode 1. I think that would be tremendous. But I think there's enough meat left on the bone that you could tell some more Plagueis stories, some Palpatine stories, some Qimir stories, some Rey and Osha stories if you needed to make a compelling season 2, to get your money worth out of this. So I still go into the next episode pretty skeptical. I'm hoping for a lot. If I don't get it, I'll be disappointed. I'll be a little bummed. But the truth of the matter is, as we've said many times before, we lived through a long drought of new Star Wars anything, of any kind of substance or worth. It's good to have Star Wars around. Keep making this content, Disney. I would even say go ahead, rehire Gina Carano. Let's have another episode with Gina Carano in it. Let's let bygones be bygones. In the spirit of cooperation, Sith and Jedi, graying Jedi and Mandalorian, may the Force be with us all.
All of us.